Good evening and welcome to LSBF Live Online. My name's Paul and tonight we're going to be looking at how you get the most from your studies. Partly an evening of ideas about how to study as well as you can with the resources you've got available, how to go about doing the actual exams that you're doing, but also an opportunity for us to show you how our live courses work, what they look like, to demonstrate the interactivity that I can have with you, you can have with me, etc. So it's a bit of a demonstration, but also an opportunity to put over some thoughts in your direction and also to answer any questions you might have. Now, since we are demonstrating the product at the moment, you get to see me on the screen. Hello. I must apologise, as so frequently seems to be the case. I am ill yet again, so I will need to be coughing a bit. And I can see we have at least, I know we have a few people who are watching this, and at least a couple of you are intent on saying stuff. So good evening, DJ, and hello, guest. Good name. Just so you're aware how this works, and our live classes work in the same basic way. I'm here in a TV studio looking straight at camera. Just over here to my left, there is a TV screen, and on the TV screen, all the chatter that you are typing in is coming up. The logic being that if you want to ask a question, just type it in. I will keep my eye on what's happening over to my left, and anything I will answer direct to screen. So, getting the most from your studies is the plan for tonight. I am now going to make myself disappear a bit. We're going to try this first of all, which puts me over to one side and gives us a nice full screen, and I think that works quite nicely. But with slides, sometimes they're a little difficult to read because of the slanty screen. So instead of doing that, maybe we should try that, I think. Yeah, we'll go with that and see how it plays. So here we go. Right, let's see if I've designed my slides properly to fit into the bit of the screen that you guys can see. We will see. Okay, let's get going then, shall we? So, as I said, welcome to the London School of Business and Finance online division. I love doing the online classes. Quite scary the first time you do them, bit odd, talking to a camera, can't see any students. But what I love about doing these is the fact that it's interactive, which is great, but also I can be talking to people from all over the world at the same time. Last term in one of my courses, I had someone from Colombia, South America, quite a few people from the West Indies, a couple of Jamaicans, Trinidadian, a Barbadian from Barbados as well. I had a guy in Chicago. I had someone in Ireland. So quite a few people to the west of London, but a huge number of people to the east. A lot of people in Moscow, the Middle East quite well represented, Cyprus a few people, a couple of people in Africa, even someone as far away as Australia. So we get a real mix, which is a great opportunity for you guys to have a nice chat as well. And DJ has decided that DJ is such a boring name, whereas jazz is cooler. I like that. Help and advice for P6 is going to be a little bit tricky because my name's Paul. Just to reassure you, you get top quality stuff at LSBF. If you come to us, we have, and we are the only college on the planet who can say this. There is an industry awards thing, and it's been going for 12 years now, I think. And 3 LSBF tutors have been named Tutor of the Year, and there is no other college that's got 3. In fact, I'm not convinced there's another college that's got 2. So our F7 tutor, F8, P7, and a bit of P1 from time to time, that's me. And also, just last week, David Laws, my colleague, was named Tutor of the Year, and he does P3, P5. So we have got some talent at this organisation. And it's not just the ones who've won, there are plenty of people who deserve to as well. But is more challenge. How is P7 taught online? P6. So yes, I do not teach P6. Woo. That's me. There is an email address. I don't know if you can see it actually. Excuse me. There we go. If we do that. So the email address is visible for you to see. And then all I've got to do is get rid of it. So if any of you want to email me, please do. But I don't teach tax. So if you want any advice on tax, email me and I will pass it on to the appropriate tutor. Jazz, I read last year in PQ magazine that you said that teaching P7 online is more challenging. So how is P7 taught online? Is the quality compromised? Oh, absolutely, Jazz. The quality is rubbish. What do you expect me to say to answer a question like that? Of course it's not compromised. Did I really say that teaching P7 online is more challenging? I remember writing various articles. I don't remember saying that. Teaching P7, to be frank, is similar in a classroom as it is online. What we do online in our courses are the same courses, same materials, same running order, same practice questions that we do in the classroom. It's just there are no students here, that's all. If I did say it, and I sort of agree with it to an extent, okay, hang on, let's do that. Oop. Hopefully you can now see it. Please let me know just down at the bottom of the screen. In fact, do you know what? Just give me a... oh no, I can't. Can you see it now, I hope? The thing about P7 is it's a very practical paper. And if I'm in a classroom, I can look into the whites of the students' eyes and get my class to do something. It's a little harder online because I can't see you. But if this was a P7 class, I would be saying, well, what do you think we should do about that? And I would be expecting some answers. So please be aware that the live classes, even though you're watching it on a screen, a lot of us tutors still make them just as interactive as the classroom. We will ask questions. We will expect you to participate. You said teaching technique is more difficult. Crikey. I'll tell you what, Jazz, I'm really sorry, but I honestly don't remember saying that, so I'll have to come back to you, I guess. So if you email me, and I guess I'll have to answer it because I don't have the article in front of me. I honestly cannot remember. Right, let's get rid of that and let's move onwards. So, good to see some interactivity already tonight. I'm not just going to be talking to myself, which is nice. Okay, preparing for exams. I'm just thinking about what Jazz has asked there. Was this an article about why people passing F8 and P7 pass rate's not so good? I write a lot of articles for them and I really can't remember. So I should move on, shouldn't I? So this is all about preparing for exams, specifically professional exams, very specifically ACCA exams. I'm not qualified to talk about stuff other than accountancy exams. And that's important. Because when we start talking about technique, study technique, etc., the way that I studied when I was at school, the way I studied when I was at university, it's very different to professional exams. Very, very different. Yes, the address is indeed at lsbf.org.uk. Yes, correct. If I wanted to be really clever here, I could actually make this beautifully interactive and say to you, if you email me right now, I have now got my work email account open on a screen in front of me, so if you try and email me, I'll tell you if it arrives. Just how live is this? Very exciting. Yeah, I'll talk more about the optional papers and the fact they're a low pass rate a little later on. Although I should say, Jazz, I did a presentation on Monday night about option papers. So to a certain extent, you're 2 days late with the question. But I will refer to it. Okay. The key, of course, with studying for professional exams is one very simple thing. You wish to pass. So how do we do this? The answer, of course, is easy. If you wish to pass, try and get 50 marks or more. Ha ha ha. Well, that's the little gentle introduction. The more important question, of course, is how do you get 50 marks? Well, the key to this is knowing the examiner. It really is. And you must appreciate that what one examiner wants is not necessarily what another examiner wants. I'll give you an example. On the F8 and P7 exams, which I teach, audit exams, you have to talk about accounting rules because auditors' main job is checking to see if a company has followed the accounting standards. But then, of course, you also sit F7 and P2, which are financial reporting papers, which test whether you can actually do the accounting standards by giving you examples and say, go on then, how would you apply those? The point is that on all 4 of those exams, you are likely to be talking about accounting rules in your answers. I don't teach F7 and P2. I've got plenty of other stuff to do, thank you. But I couldn't walk into a P2 class and tell the students you should do it like this because that's what the P7 examiner wants. The fact is, examiners are humans and they are different. They have a different view on life. So when you're preparing for your ACCA papers, it's not just getting a big book, going through lots of knowledge. You've got to get inside your examiner's head. Most of the examiners we've got have been doing the same paper for a very long time. And that means they get into habits. They have ways of asking questions and they are looking for specific things in the answers. And the examiners will tell all of the markers what they want to follow in the marking. And these days, the marking is all done on a computer screen, sort of internet type of idea, and the examiner can be watching the people marking as they do it and can jump in and say, whoa, why are you giving a mark for that? Why are you not giving a mark for that? So it's very carefully regulated. Yeah. It is... No. Oh dear. Right. I'll tell you what we're going to do here, just to show you how we react to what you guys need. I'm going to duck out of this quickly, and we're going to do this, and I will write it up here, okay? Because you've got it all wrong. Okay, that is my email address at work. If you have any problems with that, I can also be contacted through Facebook, LinkedIn. I don't do Twitter. I hate Twitter. So there are plenty of ways of getting in touch with me, but that is the email address. I'm going to leave it there for a count of about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Goodbye. Right. So, let us carry on. No problem, my friend. Facebook ID. What's my name? The good thing about being Paul Merison is there are not many Paul Merisons about, so just search Paul Merison on Facebook. I believe there are 2 of us in the entire Facebook system. The one you will look for has a little photograph of a small boy aged about 5 or 6 with ginger hair. That was me. Do be careful, the other Paul Merison on Facebook, by some amazing fluke, is also an auditor. Would you believe it? But if you see a Paul Merison who likes scuba diving, field hockey and lives in Hastings in Sussex. That's the other one, okay? You're looking for the one with the picture of the small boy. That's me. Oh, it's all very complicated stuff. And Gabriel Herbert, otherwise known as Jazz, my friend, yes, I have got your email. The joys of modern technology. There we go, my friend. Right. So, as I said, you've got to know what the examiner wants, and this is going to have a big impact on how you do your studying in advance of the exam. Okay? Now, I noticed that Jazz says he's failed P7 twice. P7 obviously is my paper, so please, 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 let's use the fact we're now in contact and let's get you through it this time. I don't know if I've taught you before. I don't recognise the name, that doesn't mean I haven't. But let's get you signed up to a course and let's get you through this, okay? Because P7 is a very, very know the examiner type of paper. At the end of this presentation, I will be adding a little bit to it. We've had the examiners conference last week, which means I actually got to spend a bit of time with the F8 and P7 examiners and ask them lots of probing questions. And the good news, by the way, is that the P7 exam is not changing for June. It's exactly the same syllabus, and she was very clear, same style of questions will continue. So if you know what you're doing, you'll be fine. And interestingly, it's not just about knowing how to pass, it's also about knowing how not to fail. And Jazz, my friend, it is almost as if I have placed you to make comments at the appropriate time. Because here is one way to make sure you don't fail. Do not read the textbook. No, no, no. By the time you get up to the option papers, you are doing high-level application papers. It's a bit like learning to drive. You cannot learn it from a book. You learn to drive by driving. And whilst driving, having someone sitting next to you pointing out how you could do it better. There are some useful tips when driving, and that's what P7 is all about. You can't learn it from a book. Obviously there is some knowledge, there is knowledge on every exam paper somewhere. On P7, I would estimate you'll get about 8 marks, maybe 10 marks for knowledge and 90 for application. So if you're reading a textbook, going the whole wrong way about it. And anyone who does that is almost bound to fail, because whilst they're getting the knowledge, they're not doing the thing they should be doing. But I'll contact you after tonight's session and we'll start thinking about that, because you'll have some knowledge there, but your approach sounds all wrong. Anyway, so how to pass. As I said earlier, ACCA exams, very, very different. This is a professional qualification. It is more intensive, and you don't get a pass for simply turning up. When I was at university, it was made very clear to me that as long as I attended a few lectures and did a small amount of work, everyone passes. With ACCA, that is not the case. It is a genuine test, not just are you clever, but are you preparing the right way and giving the examiner what the examiner wants. So, good example of this. When I was at university, I remember I was quite good at writing essays that would get the comment at the end, a little short on content in places, but well written. And that was good enough to get a decent grade every time. On professional exams, that would fail. Because with professional exams, the people who are marking it have a specific marking guide which lists out the various points that the examiner thinks should go into the answer and get some credit. It's very simple. If you are talking about some of the things in the marking guide, you get marks. If you are talking about something outside the marking guide, it is left up to the marker's interpretation. And the higher up the papers you go, the easier it is to score marks by saying something that the examiner hadn't thought of, because the questions tend to be so open-ended and so real-world, there are plenty of correct points you could make. But if you're studying and you're practicing doing questions, and you practice one and you go look at the answer, and the points in the answer are totally different to what you've done, it is highly unlikely that you're heading for a pass. If you've got some points that are in there but a few other ones, you're probably okay. As I said, there are generally a lot of points that can get credit. But if you've got nothing in the answer, something has gone wrong. So the key to this is looking at a question and trying to work out what would be in the marking guide. Almost put yourself in the examiner's head. And one useful tip here is quite a few examiners will write the answer first and then the question, because they know what they want to test you on and therefore to get you to write in the answer. So they formulate an answer that would be a good answer to an exam question, and then the question follows from the answer. Now what that means is that when I'm reading an exam question, I don't read the story, because the story arrived after the answer. The answer already existed at some point. What I will do is just read the requirements, and from that I can judge the sort of things that are likely to go into the answer even without reading the story. But it's not just coming up with points. That's stage one, if you like. Understanding that when that type of question comes up, this is the sort of stuff you're looking to say. You've then got to have someone tell you how to say it. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got given was in my younger years when I was learning to drive a car. And my driving instructor said, look, if you want to pass your driving test, there's one very simple piece of advice that seems to work. Get inside the examiner's head. And the examiner, when they are testing if you know how to drive, well, of course, they're checking you know that the steering wheel turns the car, and there's a gear stick and a clutch and an accelerator and a brake and stuff. Yeah. But what they're really looking for is, are you road aware? Because most accidents happen because the person in the car isn't taking enough notice of what's going on outside. So my driving instructor said, look, if you know that's the case, why don't you overdo it a bit, and during your driving test, talk about the things outside the car. So say, oh, I can see there's a car at that junction coming up. I wonder if he'll turn out. Oh, look, that dog might run out in front of me. And also, whenever the tester, the examiner, is looking at you directly and you can feel their eyes burning into you, look straight into the mirrors, look out the window. Just make it clear that you are very interested in what's going on outside. And to be frank, on the sort of papers I teach, that is the sort of advice that gets you through the exam. I will say to you, in that type of question, as long as you do that a lot, you'll pass. It's not knowledge, it's tactics. But it's not just the clever tactics that your tutor will share with you. Tutors who've known the examiners for years, who've known the exam paper for years, and therefore have a strategy. There's also some fairly basic stuff, and every examiner says this. They say, why don't you answer the easiest question first? I mean, go and get some marks. So go and find a question, and it will be different for different students. Go find a question where you think, yeah, that's the sort of question I'm well practiced on. Do it first. That way you give it enough time allocation, and your confidence level will go up because you're doing something that you know is generating credit. But also, because there is an old saying that says, first impressions last. First impressions are critical. You're told when you go for a job interview, the first 15 seconds or so, absolutely critical. And it's the same when your script is being marked. If the first thing that your marker sees is not very good, that sets the tone in their head. Do a good question first, And the first thing that your marker is going to see is something good, and that makes them think, okay, this is someone who I think's got a good chance of passing. And that means when you're doing something where it's a bit 50-50, should you get a mark or not, the person marking is on your side because they think you're good enough because of that first answer you wrote. Psychology, you see. I'm glad you like the article, Jazz, because that article is coming up in this presentation. Now, in the article, it was golf, I think. I hope it was golf because it's slightly different here, but same principle, and a really important principle. And one other useful point, if you're going to get the most from your studies, I don't want to criticise you, Jazz, because I don't know you. All I know about you is you've failed P7 twice, and you tell me you've done self-study. I think on the lower level papers, doing pure self-study can work. Once you get to the higher level stuff, you need someone to guide you and also to answer questions, point you in the right direction, tell you what you're doing that's good, and point out things where you could improve. So use us and abuse us. We are here for that very reason. Golf and Tiger Woods. Yes, golf. Okay, good. It's slightly different in here, but same principle. As I said earlier, the marking guide in the exam questions is based around the requirements. Give you a very simple example of this, which Jazz is going to get because Jazz has done P7. Around about 11 years ago, I think, there was an exam question on the forerunner to P7. And I read the question and I thought, ooh, good students will do well on this. And bad students won't. And I'll tell you why. Typically, exam questions are about companies that make things, you know. And this question was about sheep. Yeah, sheep, you know. Bah. It was about a farm and sheep. Now, the simple fact is, farms are businesses. They make things, they sell things, they grow things. They're just like anything else. But because you're normally used to seeing questions about chemicals companies and mobile phone companies and sports manufacturing companies, a farm would have made a few people go, oh. But when I read that question, I didn't think about anything to do with sheep and cheese, which is what it was about. I read that question and said, oh, that's an audit risk question. And the moment you see it's an audit risk question, that tells you your tactics, and if you got those tactics, you will pass. Easy. In fact, when I read the exam paper, I don't read the story straight afterwards. I only read the requirements to see what's come up. And that tells me if the paper's okay or not. So I didn't realise it was a farm with cheese and sheep and stuff for ages afterwards, because it doesn't matter. So the requirements are very, very important. I keep going on about P7, it's one of my papers. Frankly, P7, there's about 5 types of question, maybe 6. Similar on F8, to be honest. And your job is easy. You should be able to tell me, if you're studying those papers, what those 5 or 6 areas are, and you should have tactics for each of them. Good tactics that you know will get marks, and the bad tactics you know you must avoid. And if you don't know that stuff, then you're sunk. Because on a paper which is so repetitive that at least 4 of those 5 or 5 of those 6 areas are definitely coming up for big marks, you've just got to hammer them every time because it's easy, because they always come up. So requirements are very, very key. Just to help Jazz out here, for the P7 exam, it is ethics and professional issues, business risk or audit risk or risk of material misstatement, so risk questions, which are huge, matters and evidence or procedures questions, so audit work, which is the second most important after risk, I would suggest, audit reports, and then the non-audit assignment questions have tactics as well. Requirements on exams, of course, will vary within an exam paper and between exam papers. There are some requirements that will simply say on the F8 paper, for example, explain the auditor's responsibilities regarding, I don't know, subsequent events. Well, that's factual. There is an audit standard that tells you what those requirements are. If you've done the work, you know the answer. Now, you haven't got the marks yet because you've still got to be able to write it down. More on that coming up soon. Sometimes, though, a question will ask something a little bit different, like, why is the audit of financial instruments difficult? So this one is getting you to think. You don't really need to know anything about financial instruments and IFRS 9 and that nonsense. You just need to know why it's a problem. And if you don't know it, it's not that hard to answer it by thinking. A bit of common sense. So we've got knowledge, we've got thinking, we've got understanding. And then we've got the bit which causes so much problems for students, applying the knowledge. And one of the reasons why some exam papers have very low pass rates is that if on P7, for example, a question says, here's a story, what are the audit risks? There are no marks for saying what audit risk means. You've got to get straight into that story, go and find them, point one, and secondly, know how to explain them. And that's application, and a lot of students are very bad at it, largely because they don't practice doing it. Again, that will come up in a little while. June 13 it was for 8 marks. I remember it well. And yet the funny thing is, Jazz, that is very similar to a few other questions we've had, like why is it difficult to audit related parties? Why is it difficult to audit fair value? Given there's a new revenue accounting standard out there now that will hit the September sitting, not June. At some point, why is it difficult to audit IFRS 15 revenue? The answer to all of those questions is the same thing. Why is it difficult to audit anything? It's technically complicated. It's something which changes a lot, and IFRS 9 gets reissued every 35 minutes as far as I can tell. It's got lots of estimates and judgment in it. It's so complicated the client doesn't understand it. It's so complicated the client is going to use it to try and manipulate the figures. And because it's complicated, you have to rely on outside experts, and you're never too sure whether the expert is as expert as they should be, or have they been bribed by the client to tell you what the client wants to hear, and does the expert, even if they're independent, understand what they're meant to be doing for you as an auditor? Do they get your process? And that little list of points is going to answer pretty much any question when it says, why would auditors find it difficult to... You see my point here? There's a tactic for every type of question. Anyway, moving onwards. In terms of knowledge, I say it's the easy bit because it's easy that you know what you need to do. Whether you're a good student or a weak student, the knowledge has got to be shoveled into your head. And that takes hard work. I have a colleague in another part of the world who talks about taking the medicine. At some point, you've got to swallow some horrible medicine. You've just got to go and do it. It is hard graft. Some lucky people have a photographic memory, the vast majority don't. That's where you've got to put in some hours. But the good news is that on some papers there's not that much underlying knowledge. It really is about ability, tactics, if you like. Now, in terms of knowledge, there are some useful tactics that you can use. And one of those is повторение matучения, which is Russian for repetition is the mother of learning. That's what I mean by taking the medicine. Just repeat, repeat, repeat. It's a bit brutal, but it gets stuff in there. I would also suggest you use as many different approaches as possible to memorize things. I'll give you a simple example of this. We've just had some codes put on the doors in this building so we can control where certain people can go. And they're those, you know, those sort of metal rectangular code things where you're pushing buttons in. They're not digital ones. They're those ones with those really sort of quite chunky square buttons. And a lot of people don't get the fact that because it's a mechanical lock, it's not a computerized lock. If the code is, I don't know, 5736, it doesn't matter which order you put it in because you're just basically pushing levers down. As long as they're all pushed in at some point, it's great. So whenever I am presented with one of these codes, say 5736, 5th of July 1936, does that mean anything to me? No. So 5736 is never going to stick in my head. On the other hand, I was born on the 7th of March, so 7-3 is going to work for me. I wasn't born in 1956 or 1965, so it's not perfect, but 7365 is more likely to stick in my head because it's got a personal reason for sticking there. One way of learning things, which I've used, and I'll say more about this shortly, is you get a blank sheet of paper and a pen out and you try and write it down. I, of course, do this a lot in front of classes. I think a lot of students don't get this, but when I teach certain things, I don't have the answers next to me. The reason I can do it without the notes is I've done it so many times. Repetition, yes? Simple example here. What considerations does an audit firm need to have before it takes on a new client? And I always say to my students, you should be able to come up with 10 different ideas. And the best way to do it is a blank screen or a blank sheet of paper and just keep practicing. And that way you'll keep coming up with some points over and over again. All comes down to pure hard practice. And if you don't want to write it down, fine, don't write it down. Think it, say it, yell it, sing it out loud, but make yourself do something. Set yourself a challenge. I'll tell you about this in a minute. Challenges are good because there's something to aim for. And maybe what you want to do is get a study buddy, either in the room or online or whatever, and set little challenges to each other. Very nice way of doing things. Also, another way of doing things is do it the way that tutors do it. If I was going to teach... oh, Jazz is off now, look. I've set Jazz off on a challenge. If I was going to teach any topic at all, I start with overview. So if I was going to teach, I don't know, related party transactions to you, I would say, right, what is a related party transaction? Well, guess what? It's a transaction with another party, a company or a person to whom you are somehow linked. Pretty obvious. And then you say, well, what's the next level of learning after that? Well, a lot of transactions in daily life are with someone or a company to whom you have a link. Sometimes it's a big link. Sometimes it's a relatively minor link. And sometimes there's no link at all. You go and buy your newspaper from the local newsagent, there's no link there at all. And then you think, well, okay, that's interesting, but what are the rules for these transactions? The answer is they must all be disclosed in the company's accounts. And then the important bit. Ask yourself, why? Why do they get disclosed? Because if you understand the logic behind it, it's more likely to stick. Why should they be disclosed? Because any transaction you do with someone or a company that you know, and there's a bit of a link, could mean that that transaction is not being done under normal terms. Because you know them. So, I ran our Singapore office for 3 years, so I used to live out in Singapore. I have a friend who has moved out to Singapore, not working for us, but working for someone else. But he's doing the same basic job I did, which means for 2 months of the year, he comes back to the UK because the classes are finished. And he said to me, Paul, if you ever need to go to Singapore in one of those 2 months, you know, my apartment's sitting there empty, you can use it. Now, of course, a normal transaction, I'd be paying for this. But because he knows at some point I'll do him a favour in return, there's no payment involved, is there? You know, maybe when I leave, I'll fill his fridge with beer or something as a thank you. I don't know. But the thing is, if he is letting someone use that apartment for free, then he is losing out in that transaction deliberately, because it's maintaining, you know, friendly relations with people and stuff. But if he was a company, his shareholders might not be too happy about that. So any transaction with someone you're linked to should be disclosed. Why? So the shareholders can understand whether you are benefiting or losing out on this, or whether it's been done on normal commercial terms, just so they can get a view. That's it. And if you understand that, you'll understand why the disclosures need to give the terms of the deal so that someone can understand if it's under normal commercial terms. If you understand it, it sticks. Example for you. I have got 4 children, and the 2 boys especially are very interested in the world. They love looking at maps, they love looking at flags, they've studied various countries at school, and I think it's helped by the fact that they also lived in Singapore with me, and in Singapore the schools are full of kids from all over the world. It's that sort of country. So my youngest son, for example, his last class out there before we moved back, he was the only British kid in the class. There was something like 17 different countries represented. And children need to think that their parents know everything. We don't, of course, but they need to think that. It makes them trust us. So I realised from a fairly early point that my kids wanted me to prove that I knew every country in the world. So I thought I'd better learn these then. So how do you learn all 193 countries? Well, do you know what I did? If I was ever stuck on a train or sitting in a cab or sitting at a bar waiting for a friend to turn up, I would get a sheet of paper out and a pen and I'd start writing. I'd practice, in other words. And then I learned another technique, which I now do for other reasons. I'm trying to get a little bit fitter, and I've got a treadmill, a running machine at home. But running on a running machine is very boring because you never go anywhere. So I've got a little tactic, which is every 8 paces, so dun 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 dun, Canada, dun 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 dun, USA, dun dun dun, Mexico, and I do all 193. Повторение, matruchenia, repetition. Yes, it gets it in there. But the other thing, of course, is it sets me a challenge because I do not allow myself to stop running until I've gone through all 193. So it guarantees I run a certain distance because I will not stop until I've named all 193. The worst thing is when I get to the end and think, oh, I've missed one out. Thankfully, I don't normally do that. Now, you might have noticed there, I said Canada, USA, Mexico. I was going to go round the world map because I can do that. I'm fascinated by maps. I know what the world looks like. So I can go North America, South America, Caribbean, all the way around Europe, Russia and its ex-republics, out into Asia, out through China, down through the Southeast, the South Asian Sea, whatever it's called, down through Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, etc., Singapore, where I used to live, Indonesia, out to Australia, New Zealand, and then for some reason I come back and do the Israel, Lebanon, Syria bit, and then Africa. And I can do it because I know how they're linked to each other. But the point here, the point here is about variety, is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, my throat and chest are going. And if you can't do that, take another approach. Think about which countries have you been to? Which countries played in the last World Cup if you're a football fan? Try and go through and name 1A, 1B, 1C, and then when you get to the end, do it again. You can't see that, but it says famous people. Think of famous people you know and where are they from? And think about who's in the news at the moment. Obvious countries in the news at the moment would be Syria, Libya's been in the news the last few days, Greece. So just lots of different tactics to use. And the reason we use these tactics, here, see Jazz, great minds think alike, is exactly what Jazz has said. What about students who have very limited time because they've got a lot of working life? Exactly. That's why you need the methods, the tactics, to get around the fact that you don't have enough time to just sit there and spend hours on this. I would say if you spent half an hour a day picking out 2 or 3 things you're meant to learn and just have a go at them on a sheet of paper, you'd be amazed how quickly you can build this stuff up. Amazed. So, set yourself a target. You'd be amazed, you probably can do 100 fairly easily. And here's the clever bit, I suppose. Go and compare what you came up with a list of all the countries of the world, and now write down all the countries you didn't get. Because let's face it, the night before an exam, those are the things to be learning, aren't they? Because the obvious stuff is going to be in there whatever you do. And of course, a lot of students like to go with what they like, so when they study, they're drawn towards the things they know they're already good at, which doesn't really help, does it? So create little lists of the things you always forget when you're doing stuff. But as I said, pure repetition. It's a little bit painful, but it does the job. I can do all 193 countries. Their capital cities, because my kids expect that as well. Because of my job, I can do all the audit standards in order, all the accounting standards in order, and also every individual element of the corporate governance code of the United Kingdom and Singapore. I know, I'm boring, but I need this stuff for my job and I've got to hammer it in there somehow. And that's how I do it. Running machine, blank bits of paper, talking to myself. People think I'm mad, and they are probably right. Knowledge gets you marks, so it is worth knowing, especially on the lower level papers, but it does have uses on the higher level papers. So for example, if a question said, let's just see if I can do this. No, I can't. Right, just bear with me, because this slide is a bit on the big side. So let's get rid of that. And then do that. There we go, look, now you can see it. If a question says, describe the audit risks in the above scenario, maybe you'll go look at the story and maybe you will see them. And maybe you'll get to the end of the story and say, no, I didn't find much in there. Well, if you know every accounting standard number, you're never going to be asked to list them all out. But in your head, you could now look at that story and say, okay, IAS 1, main issue in there is going concern, the fact that threats have to be disclosed in the accounts. Any going concern threats in there? No. IAS 2 is inventory, you know, lower of cost, net realisable value. Any indication that there's inventory that might be overstated because the NRV is less than the cost? No. And then you go up to what's next? Number 7, presumably, cash flow statements. Anything about the cash flow statement? No. 8, prior year adjustments. 10, events after the reporting period. Look at the dates. Is there anything there that could be adjusting, disclosable? So knowing stuff sometimes gets you marks because you just write it down, and sometimes is a useful checklist against which a scenario can be judged. This is absolutely true. Explaining yourself. When I passed my exams, got first-time passes, thought I was a genius, and of course I was right. And then I thought I want to be a tutor because these guys look like they're having fun and I think I'd be good at this. So I became a tutor, and you know what? Knowing it's one thing, having to explain it to a class who are asking you questions, then you find out if you understand it. So my advice is, don't just stare at books and get the knowledge in there. Don't just think through the understanding, practice explaining it. Now, there's numerous ways you can do that with someone else who's studying. Or email your tutor and say, is this a decent explanation of the point? And then just send it to me and I'll tell you what I think. Stand in front of a mirror, explain it to yourself. Pretend you are running a class. Go stand in a small room and say, hello class, today we're going to do this. And then see if you can keep talking without tripping over your words. So, practice your explanations. And one thing I like to do is imagine my smallest son is next to me. He's very good at asking why. So whenever you say something, say, yeah, but why? Like the related party stuff from earlier on. Why do they need to be disclosed? So shareholders know about them. Why do they want to know about them? Because they're with a related party. Yeah, boring. Why is that important? Why is that different to the other transactions? Because with a related party, it might not be on normal commercial terms. But why do they care about that? Because the company might be losing money by doing someone they're related to a favour. And that would affect shareholder value. So drill down by asking yourself, yeah, but why? I was asked about a year and a half ago, I think this was. It was PQ magazine actually, so again, you might have read this. They did a round table at the end of the year and they sat about 6 of us from various colleges around a table and the editor asked us questions. And at the end he said, okay, if you had one piece of advice for students that would improve the pass rates immediately, just one thing, what would you say? And we all had to write it down, so we all had a fair go at saying it. And 2 of us in the room said the same thing. We said, explain every point you make. This increases audit risk because this is a self-interest threat to the auditor's independence because Inspect a copy of the invoice because or in order to prove that the date was in July. Explain everything. It will double the length of everything you write, which for most students is good news, and the explanations typically have marks attached to them and demonstrate understanding. Simple tip, but I'd be aiming to write the word because or in order to 100 times, because that's how many marks you're trying to get. I read the examiner's report after every exam sitting. I get to talk to examiners a lot. I was an examiner once many years ago, and every examiner says the same thing. After every sitting, students do not write enough, they state facts without explaining them. That's a point that's going to come back to haunt us as well, though, in a minute or 2. Explain everything. One of the reasons this happens, of course, it's an important point, my friend. It goes into a lot of articles and a lot of things I do. It's fundamental. Povtorenie, yeah? Repetition, repeat it, repeat it. If you're doing a tax exam, financial reporting exam, and there are calculations, you're bound to practice them before exam day. You'd be crazy not to. You like playing with numbers. Of course, I get that. But you know what? A lot of people do not practice explanations. They don't want to write the words out. They run on the theory that with the numbers, I've got to have a go at them to get an answer, because then I can compare it to the real answer. With the words, I'll look at it, I'll have a quick think, and then I'll look at the answer and see if it's talking about things that I was thinking about. Yeah, congratulations. You can spot the issue. Do you know a scary thought? Typically, I had a meeting with Lisa Weaver on Wednesday last week. I used to work with her because she's Kaplan. I used to be Kaplan. What was I about to say? People do not practice writing out explanations. I've totally lost my train of thought. So, people practice calculations, they won't practice explanations. Why? Because they look in the answer and go, yeah, that's what I was going to write. Yes, here we go. So, here's the point. Here's a scary thing. The pass rate on P7 at the last exam was actually a lot healthier than normal, but it's still rubbish. 42% is rubbish. Typically, it's down in the low 30s. And yet, when you mark the exam scripts, most students, whether they are passing or failing, are spotting the same things to talk about. So spotting the issue isn't the problem. The vast majority of students easily spot enough to pass, but they can't explain themselves clearly or in a way that shows they understand why those points are relevant. And the simple fact is, a lot of students don't want to write answers out in full. And those who do may not have got their tactics right, and so all they're doing by writing out answers over and over again is embedding the wrong tactics. And once you start doing something wrong, changing your approach is very difficult. Well, it sounds like this is working out to be a useful session for at least one person here. Let's find out what mark you get when you sit this in June. I do hope you come on a course, my friend. So it is a fact on exam days, a lot of the written part, the application part of answers, the marks are horribly low. F8's a classic example. The knowledge part of auditing, people tend to do okay on. The moment it's application, the average mark collapses. When you're applying knowledge to a scenario, that's where I come in. I can tell you what a theory is, I can explain it, help you understand it, and that is some value. But to be frank, if you read a book and thought about it enough, you'd probably work it out for yourself. It's the tactics where I come in useful. The simple fact is that examiners are looking for certain things. Now, again, I apologise, I'm doing a lot of audit-related stuff, but I'm an audit tutor, so that is what I'm going to do. So I'm just moving the chat down a bit here so that I don't lose you at the bottom there. So let's have an example. If a question says, what are the audit risks, or the risks of material misstatement, which is pretty much the same thing, the moment I see that, I know weak students will fail it. Because the key with a risk of material misstatement is you have got to explain what thing in the accounts you think is at risk of being wrong, in what direction preferably, so too high, too low, if it's disclosures, presumably under-disclosed, and you've got to say why. So a good risk of material misstatement will always be in this format. The rules on provisions, or IAS 37, if you know the number, say that provisions should only be in the accounts if there is a year-end obligation, legal or constructive, as a result of a past event as at the year-end, where a payment is likely and can be estimated. The company has not provided for the legal case, so there is a risk that the provision is understated, or incomplete, if you want to use technical language, if there is a chance that they'll lose the case. So if they don't put a provision in at all, it can't be overstated, can it? It can only be understated. And any explanation which says they might get this rule wrong because of this gets marks. It's as simple as that. There is a formula for answering audit risk of material misstatement questions. Now, knowing that is one thing. Practicing it when you answer questions is another. Knowing a good technique is fabulous, but techniques need practice, as we all know is coming up in a minute or two. So if you never practice it on exam day, why are you going to do it and get it right? You need to get into the habit of doing this. People say, Paul, you're so good at writing easy to follow answers. Yeah, how many answers do you think I've written in the last 19 years? Quite a lot. Thousands. I'm good at it because I've done the repetition. I'm not a genius, I'm a machine. There are some people out there, very annoyingly, who sail through exam papers without needing much input at all. They just get it. Just like some people pass their driving test with virtually no lessons. Most don't though, do they? Most don't. And it's not just about help and technique, it's confidence. Especially in written papers, my job is to sell you confidence, because if you're confident, it will come out in the way that you write. And techniques breed confidence. Now, I know Jazz knows what's coming up next, but for the benefit of anyone else who is watching this, it is all about what you are thinking. Now, in the article I wrote, it was about golf, and I am a little bit better at golf than I probably should be. But it also applies to 10-pin bowling. And if you went 10-pin bowling with me, unless you play at a fairly high level, I will beat you. And the reason I'm going to beat you is this. It's not that I've got big shoulders and big muscles and I can really power a big heavy ball down the lane. It's got nothing to do with that. Nothing whatsoever. And to be honest, it's not even repetition, because I don't go 10-pin bowling as often as I'd like to. The reason I'm good at it is I know the technique for getting the ball to go straight. And not only do I know the technique, whenever I bowl, I say the technique to myself under my breath as I'm doing it. So I'm not one of these guys who goes out bowling with friends and we're all drinking beer and I'm saying, oh, I'm going to bowl now, ha ha. No, when I'm bowling, I say, hey, stop. I now stand with the ball in my hand and I say, right, you know what to do, Paul. There are two ways to make that ball go straight, and it is very much like golf. You fix your eyes on anything down the middle of the lane or where you want the ball to go. It doesn't even have to be the exact pin that you're trying to knock down. Just somewhere along the line, you fix your eyes on it and you do not let your head move. As you come up, you keep your eyes on it, and when you bowl, you follow through down that line. Eyes follow through, easy. Keep the head still. And if you do that with follow through, 99 times out of 100, the ball goes straight, it doesn't go down into the channel at the side, and you're going to knock most of the pins over most of the time. I'm boring, but I'm very consistent. And when I'm in the zone and doing that and reminding myself of the technique, I will knock down 8 or 9 or 10 every single time. And if you do that enough, you're going to get a few runs and knocking down a few 10s, and your score builds up very quickly. So the point here is, it's not just knowing what the technique is. It's that as I'm doing it, I'm thinking it. And I have to tell myself to do it because I don't get enough time to practice that it comes naturally. And this is where you guys are at. Because as you said earlier, you don't have enough time. So the key is, know the techniques you're going to use. And on exam day, get them in your head. And when the invigilator says, you may now begin, and you've got 15 minutes when you can write on the exam paper, but not in your answer booklet, you go and find every type of question you recognise. Oh, there's an audit risk question. Oh, there's a matters and evidence question. And you scribble the technique quickly next to it while it's still in there. That way, for the next 3 hours, every time you say, right, let's now do that question, the technique is there going, hello, here's the technique, and you won't forget it. And even better, when you are scribbling your answers down, you should be muttering under your breath. If it's an audit risk question, mention an accounting rule. Mention an accounting rule. If it's audit evidence, tell yourself, must explain why the evidence is being used. Don't just say an invoice. Say an invoice in order to check the amount, the name of the company, the date, I don't know, whatever's relevant. So the key is know the technique, practice the technique, and on exam day, force yourself to do it. Because you know what the exam hall's like, don't you? Once you've been in there for a couple of hours, you're noticing how little time there is left, you're getting distracted and you're panicking. At this point, all technique has disappeared out of that window. So you've got to make sure that you are telling yourself that after a couple of hours you will stop, sit back in your chair, deep breath, and go and look at the technique you wrote down 2 hours ago against each question type and make sure you follow it. And that will maximise your chances. Completely honest, we are nearing a conclusion coming up shortly, but be completely honest with you. One of my F8 students in June last year, so not the December sitting we've just had, but June, got 89% on F8, which, if my memory is right, was 4th in the world. Well done him. And you might be thinking, oh yeah, 4th in the world in auditing, so what? They worked for PwC, Deloitte, they've been auditing for a few years, so they're used to it, they know the words to say. No. The guy who got 89% is 19 years old, he lives in Kenya, online class. Why did he do so well? And I'll tell you why he did so well. I marked his mock exam. He did a mock exam, that in itself is good. And he sent me loads of stuff to mark as well, and loads of questions during term. But do you know what was great? I marked his mock exam and it was as if I'd written the answers. I was looking at this going, this guy's really got it. Every question where there's a technique, he is clearly doing the technique. Brilliant, well done him. He got 95, I think, on his mock, or 96 or something, 89 on the real exam day, and it's very simple. On that paper, you get a lot of reward for having good technique that's well practiced. He had good technique, he was well practiced. He listened. Before we get to the conclusion, absolutely true. I find this astonishing. Maybe you won't, and that sort of proves my point. Yes, exactly. This guy, he was up for Student of the Year this year, actually. He didn't win, unfortunately, but he works hard. Now, how not to fail. This is absolutely true. I got a phone call in August last year. And the reason I got this phone call is a student who had failed P5 4 times in a row. And she wanted to have a chat about should she carry on with P5 because she was thinking, if my memory is right, of switching to my paper P7. Now, of course, I said, I'd love to see you on P7, but after 4 times in a row, and Jazz, I hope you're listening to this because this is sort of in your sphere, isn't it, my friend? After 4 times in a row, you probably know most of the stuff on the syllabus. In fact, you could probably write it all out. So the knowledge is in there. And that's a lot to waste by giving it up. And I said, well, 4 times in a row, I mean, I wonder why you failed. And then I said to her, have you looked at the examiner's post-exam report? Especially after the paper you've just failed. Because normally when people read that, they get and think, oh, I see, so the examiner wanted that, that's where I went wrong. And she said, what examiner's report? Never read one. So you failed something 4 times in a row. The person who sets the paper and instructs the markers writes a report several pages long, going question by question as to what people did right and what people did wrong, and you've not read it. I didn't say this out loud because it wouldn't have been very professional, but I was thinking, you're an idiot. There is free help sitting there and you're not taking it. Now, of course, the tutors will read those examiners' reports and anything useful will feed it back. But if you've actually sat the exam, the results come out and immediately on the ACCA's website is the examiner's view on why people failed, and it's there for every paper after every sitting. If you're not reading that and you failed, you're an idiot. Because that is the best advice you're going to get, straight from the horse's mouth. So, examiners are very repetitive, they are very predictable, especially on my 2 audit papers, I'm delighted to say. And last week, Lisa, the P7 examiner, and also Pammy, the F8 examiner, both said, we no plans to change anything. Why would we? It's a good exam paper. A lot of papers never really change. The same types of question come up over and over again, and alarmingly, students make the same mistakes. Not technical mistakes, mistakes in approach. So one way to get a lot out of your studies is to go and read the examiner's report. Sometimes their answers to questions can be a bit unapproachable. They're really long. The examiner's reports are priceless, so useful. And when people come out of an exam on the papers I sit and say, oh, well, that paper really wasn't what I was expecting, I look at them and I just go, well, you didn't do any work then. Because it is genuinely the fact that over the last, well, certainly over the last 15 years, I have never seen an exam paper that's made me feel that's unfair. Never. They are repetitive, predictable. If you've done the work, you are perfectly primed to pass it. So, read the reports, use the resources that are there. Conclusion. Anyone who says, oh, I never got my head around that theory, that's not why you failed. Highly unlikely. Most students will do the knowledge, and a lot of that knowledge, to be honest, is not that hard. Practice writing answers. Practice explaining yourself verbally, to a friend, in writing. Pick up a pen and practice writing a bit. I love the fact in classes, I don't normally do what I'm doing tonight. Here it's all PowerPoint because I've got a script for this one. When we do classes, most of us have a pen and we are scribbling. And I love that because it gets me writing answers. It keeps my skills good. The problem, of course, is I'm writing. Are the students writing or are they just watching? Very important that I get you to do some work, you get you to do some work. The papers that have the most application on are P4, 5, 6, 7. The papers with the worst pass marks are P4, 5, 6 and 7. You do the maths. The moment the application part of the paper becomes huge, the pass rates fall because students like to learn stuff. They like to read study manuals, get it all in their head. Knowledge, 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 without ever really understanding what they're learning or being able to apply it in the real world. Being an accountant is a practical job. I don't need a walking textbook to be my finance director. More and more, I mean, if I want to look something up, there's this thing called Google, you know, it's pretty efficient. We need people who can do stuff, explain stuff, apply stuff. And on top of everything I've said, I take you back to 10-pin bowling and golf. Have a technique for every style of question that comes up regularly. Scribble it down at the start of the exam. Go find the questions that are nice and predictable, because they're the ones you want to hit hard. And practice and think it as you're doing it. Okay, I've said any questions, and I will invite questions. Can I just say one thing more, please? We are moving to 4 sittings a year later in 2015. So there will be a June sitting and then September. And from that point onwards, every 3 months. One way to get the most out of your studies, which is the title of this presentation after all, is plan ahead a bit. Ask yourself, now there's a September sitting, is it worth me maybe doing 1 extra paper through the June term, knowing that if doing 1 more paper becomes too difficult for me, I don't have to enter the exam for every paper I'm studying because I've got another sitting just 3 months later. So you could do the tuition phase, decide it's all a bit too much, don't enter the exam, don't do revision for June, and then do a revision course in September instead. Worth thinking about, isn't it? Now, at the moment, this is all a bit new, and I think no college has said what it's going to do in September. We're looking at what we're going to do. We'll certainly run revision courses for September, because there'll be resit students wanting to do it again. And we will probably do something online in between the June exams and the results coming out in August, so that those who want to defer their study a bit can study in a more continuous way. So ACCA is very good at this. They're very nice, very flexible, and 4 sittings a year is going to get very flexible. So use it. Couple more points about that flexibility. From September sitting, the exam timetable is changing. Currently it's all done over an 8-day period. It's going to be 5 days only, because with 4 sittings a year, they've got to get the exams finished and get them marked. The timetable is therefore changing completely, and certain exam combinations will no longer be possible at one sitting. Example, in September, P3 and P6, no, they're on the same day. P1 and P5, on the same day. So there's going to be some combinations that are impossible. One other thing, from September, the 7P papers, if you've still got your 5 Ps to do, can be sat in any order. So you can do the options before P1, 2, 3, which you can't do at the moment. So make sure you know the exam rules, use them to your advantage, and that will help you get the most from your studies and improve your passing chance. But especially when you're sitting high-level papers, get yourself on a course, get yourself some tutor help, and practice, practice, practice the technique you're shown, and ask for assistance. Okay, questions. You've been very talkative, so thank you. One of you in particular, very talkative, which is good, especially as it's my exam paper. Anything else you want to ask at this point before we close up this session? Okay, any tips on time? I never finish my exam for P7. Well, if you practice questions to exam time, you'll become a lot better at doing them to exam time. You have, yes. So, oh right, you've sent me as well. I'm getting emails from everybody. Fabulous. In terms of time, it's very straightforward. The exam's always been 3 hours. So when you're practicing 35 marks, question number 1 on P7, really, you should be allocating yourself, 63 minutes, I think? 1 hour and 3 minutes? Give yourself 1 hour, 3 minutes, and after 63 minutes, you stop. If there's a 10-mark part of the question, 18 minutes, then stop. That's the way to do it. You practice questions to time. Don't allow yourself to go over, and you'll start realizing how you have to fit in. But one other thing I would say is, I don't like people who say, I never finish. No one ever finishes. On a P7 exam, you're aiming for 100 marks. In the questions you've done, there might be 250 potential marks available, because there's a lot of potential right answers. You're not going to finish. In a 10-mark question, you've finished when you have supplied 10 marks worth of answer. If you've got other points to make, I'm delighted. It's a 10-mark question. You're done. Move on. So time management, really the best thing to do is practice questions to time. Do the mock exams under the time allocation and send them in for marking. Okay, thank you very much. A new voice comes in at the end. I'm glad you found it useful. You've got my email address. Any questions you want to ask, please feel free. But for now, I'm going to make myself reappear. There I am, look, hello. And say thank you all very much for listening. It's been a pleasure. And my P7 friend in particular, I look forward to some conversation soon, and I hope to see you guys on some courses this term. Other than that, thank you all very much. Been a pleasure. Good night.